In a very prestigious area of London sits a large Victorian townhouse with black and white washed walls surrounded by other cloned Victorian townhouses. The quadrangle overlooks the beautiful gardens of Berkeley Square, Mayfair. Try to imagine Paddington Bear, Mary Poppins, and the song a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. It's hard to imagine that in the midst of its beauty is a darker side. And there it sits, 50 Berkeley Square, the most haunted house in London, allegedly. Why has this house got this reputation? Well, history shows us that over time, many tales are told. Some stick in the imagination of the listener, and like Chinese whispers, the story twists and deforms over time, allowing the manifestation of ghostesses. Built in 1740 by William Kent and standing 4 stories high, the early history is unclear, but from the early 1800s until his death, it was the home of George Canning, who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from April 1827 to his death in August 1827. The only incidents he is said to have reported is some strange noises. The haunting of Berkeley Square was carried on to a Miss Curzon, who lived there until she passed away at the ripe old age of 90 in 1859. Not much is known about this time. The house was already beginning to gain a slight reputation from neighbours. They reported loud, strange noises coming from an empty house. In 1840, a young man, full of Dutch courage, Robert Warboys, spent the night as part of a bet. The landlord allowed this, but with conditions. 1. He must be armed with a pistol. 2. The landlord must be informed immediately by pulling a bell linked to the landlord's room. He would spend the night in the second-floor bedroom. Around midnight, the landlord was woken by the bell ringing. He ran to the room and found the young Warboys huddled in a corner with a look of pure terror in his eyes. The pistol had been fired with smoke still lingering around it. There are 2 different endings to this. 1, he died of pure fear, and 2, he left and never spoke of what he saw. Did Warboys even exist? People started to take the rumours seriously. They vary from a young boy who was locked in the attic by a nasty maid, a young girl said to have been killed by a servant, to a young woman said to have thrown herself from the attic window after her uncle abused her. There is no evidence of any of these things being true. Could just be stories that have been embellished over the years. From 1859 The house was occupied by a Mr. Thomas Myers, who, by all accounts, was a recluse. He lived alone and never left the house. It was alleged that he slowly went mad and died at the age of 76 in 1874. A relative of his stated that Mr. Myers changed when his fiancée rejected him. He locked himself away and became more active around the house at night. The relative believed that because he slept during the day, his nocturnal activities gave rise to many thinking the house was haunted, as they saw lights flickering late at night and heard strange noises, which she believed was coming from him moving around the house. The house went into disrepair at the time of Mr. Myers, making the stories seem more realistic. While the house was empty, another young man, Lord George Littleton, also took a bet to stay over in one of the upper floor bedrooms. He armed himself but was skeptic. According to him, a strange mist appeared. It was brown, had tendrils. He shot at it but couldn't see anything once the smoke had cleared. He left. 4 years later, Littleton had committed suicide. Years later, another story tells of a businessman who moved in with his 2 teenage daughters. The women were said to feel a terrible sense of dread coming from the upper bedroom. The fiancé of one of the daughters decided to show them there was nothing to be afraid of by sleeping in the room. Captain Kentfield went to the room. 30 minutes later, terrible screams were heard and then a gunshot. They found him dead in the middle of the room. The nameless thing of Berkeley Square, and to quote Cryptopia, this unidentifiable monstrosity is said by some to be a vile, phantasmagorical killer from beyond the grave, though there is some evidence to suggest that it may be a bizarre mutant cephalopod, which lurks in the filthy labyrinth of the London sewer system, waiting to rise up and kill again. End quote. Well, you never know what's lurking in the maze of London's sewers. One of the more well-known cases states that sometime in 1887, 2 sailors, looking for somewhere to sleep late one night after a night of drinking, got into the now very run-down empty house. After making a fire, they bedded down for the night, when suddenly a strange mist came at them, its tendrils grabbing at them. One of the men went to grab a rifle, but the mist creature lashed out, grabbing one by the throat. The other man ran out in terror and ran to find a policeman. When they got back to the house, they found the other man twisted and dead on the steps, his neck broken. But there is also differing accounts of this story, if at all real. There were no more sightings or strange things happening that we know of. It is so difficult to separate fact from fiction. Are these stories the product of a writer of ghost stories and of the great ability we have to let our imaginations run away with us? In 1920, Harry Price looked into the house. His investigation uncovered some interesting results. One being the house used as a headquarters for a crew of counterfeiters in 1790. Could the stories be a cover to hide the crime and keep people away? With the neighbours' accounts in 1840 of strange and loud noises, and the fact that the property was vacant for long periods of time, his final conclusion was that, quote, a particularly nasty poltergeist had been active at number 50 in the 1840s, but doubted that the thing was still at large, end quote. Antique book dealers Mag's Brothers occupied the building from 1938 until recently. They have since moved premises. They have always maintained that nothing strange has ever happened while they were at the property. But according to some sources, they never used the top rooms where these events were alleged to have happened.